What I wanted to talk about today is, interestingly enough, I've been talking to different pro teams and universities, and everybody's like, oh, what do we do now? Like, what can we do? And we have people with full gyms at home, and we have people with nothing. They're in a broom closet. And so I started to wonder, like, okay, well, what is worthwhile to prescribe, and what is worth it? What, I mean, are people do, like I see on Instagram, like people are doing planks and, lunges and stuff like that, which I guess is okay, but is that just too little, too late? Or is there something as a minimum? I guess it depends on your sport too and your level, but if you're working with like a Major League Baseball player or a NBA athlete or an ice hockey player, and we'll get all of you to jump in on this, like what, I mean, if you had your druthers and you could say, like, this is what we're going to do, what would you do, given some of these constraints? So I'm going to start with Bob Alejo, and then let's kind of go through there. Let's do the baseball one. Bob, Sam, but Bob, you'll go first. And let's assume the worst in terms of like no weights, or what are some of the things that you would prescribe during this period? And let's assume that this is going to be a couple of months, if not longer. What are some of the things you're doing, Bob, to get people ready? Minimum requirements, in your opinion.
I don't think there's any assumptions. I mean, it is going to be a couple of months, and it's not what I do. Yeah. It is what am I doing? The first thing I wanted to do was make sure they were moving and doing their conditioning, their fitness work. I want to get that out first. We sent those programs out to all 19 teams. And then the second thing is coming back around and going over the list that I asked for earlier. Tell me what you have at home in terms of weights, bands, medicine balls. And you're right. I have a few that have access to a full-on gym. Their dad or their mom is a teacher at a high school or PE. They have full access to the gym. And we have people who just one response was, what do you have to train? And she said, my living room. So, but in terms of getting outside, everybody can get outside, get on the grass. I told somebody, get on the pavement like I used to do, and we all used to do years ago when, you don't have a park, you just run on the pavement, crying out loud. I want to make sure they were moving, and I want to make sure they were doing fitness. So that, now going back around, the teams that I want to get going first on what I would consider a strength program, albeit body weight or a few dumbbells to a full-on gym, is to go after fall teams first, and then get the basketballs and the spring after that.
If I were to isolate, say like, hey, Bob, you got some pretty high level baseball pitchers, what are you prioritizing? Same kind of things, or
same thing?
I mean,
I think you could probably get away with, so this thing goes pretty deep, I guess. So first of all, I think, cuff weights is bullshit. That doesn't do anything. So to say like, oh, we're going to take a can of green beans and do all this, and you might as well just take a ping pong ball and do that. But it would be fitness, especially what we know about pitchers, that the lower body has a huge influence on shoulder and elbow health. So, again, it's the fitness. That's, in my opinion, that's going to be what separates everybody out when we come back, because of, you may have already talked about this before I hopped on last week, is, coaches are going to try to jam 3 months into the first day and then 3 more months into the second day and on and on and on. So, watching this load is going to be critical. And since I'm in charge of that for all the teams, I'll help with that a little bit. Still, the one thing that I tell these kids is, a great strength and conditioning program is augmented by, right, weightlifting and practice, right? So when I design the programs, I design them around not lifting and not practicing, which is a huge contributor to all things good in sport. And so they're doing much more movement, more plyometrics than some teams, than they would normally, because I went ahead and controlled for no practices and no lifting. It's a program, in other words, the way I explained to them, it's a program that you cannot do when we come back to regular lifting and practice. So I'm doing enough now so we can do that, so that you're prepared to practice. I also make sure I tell them, like I always do, just tell them the truth. Is this program going to get you in great shape? No, it's not, because you're not lifting and you're not practicing. It ties it in nicely. But what it is going to do is going to enable you to be able to start practicing. Because I think after about, anywhere between, 4, 5, and 14 days, there's going to be a huge attrition rate for those who aren't watching loads. And that's where I feel like we can jump ahead because we are the have-nots. So as a mid-major school, Division I, right now, Notre Dame, Alabama, Florida State, they got the same shit we do, nothing. And now I'm saying, okay, you say you got buy-in, just generally speaking. You say you have buy-in, you say kids love your program. Really, how hard is it to get them excited when you walk into a 20,000 square foot room with 20 platforms and HD TVs all over the place? Now we'll see how much buy-in you got and how creative you are in conditioning and understanding movement and sources and communication. So in my opinion, we can take a big step ahead because now the playing field is even of sorts. Not that, we don't have football, but not that we're going to win a national championship in basketball, but we certainly can be better than most. There's also, too, that youth movement that's happening out there in the strength and conditioning world. None of them have been at a have-not. There's very few of those. They're walking into places that have no shortage of the ability to program. Right now, you got towels, chairs, linoleum floors, driveways with anywhere from a 5 to 10% grade. Now, what are you going to do? So that's back to the original question. I guess my primary goal is to get them to move and get heart rates going.
Okay, that's very good. Thank you, Bob. We're going to jump over to Sam Feldman, and he's dealing directly with, again, baseball too. So I'm curious to get his thoughts at the pro level, what's happening now and what he thinks should happen.
Hey guys. So the pro level, I look at my level as basically college because the guys I've had are somewhere between, if they're from the States, somewhere between 20 and 24. And so those guys don't really have a gym. And so I was fortunate this year, Derek, with you and with Lee Taft speaking to us during spring training. Sorry, let me move my mic with the wind. That I've learned from you. And so the biggest thing I can do is build out speed programs for the guys. I think, fortunately, we're not in a repeat effort sport. So guys may get a run in every once in a while. The best thing they can get is power and speed through a well thought out program that way. And much as Bob has said, and I believe even written for Carl's website, throwing is a full body. It's a movement, full body movement, not just upper body when it comes to pitchers. And in general, we're probably moving before we're throwing. So it still really is a full body movement. And I really think the biggest thing when I look at programming, and I think it can extrapolate to all sports, but when I look at it with baseball, is energy systems and body movements and body parts. So being able to develop speed and power, being able to have a program that works on acceleration one day, max velocity another, gives them some tempo running, some technique running. At least through there, we're building speed that way. So they have a great chance to build speed without overdoing it. They can go for a walk on a daily basis if they want to make up for all the movement they miss on a given day because you're pent up at the house, and that's fine. But the way I've looked at it with guys who are truly bought in and truly want to at least get as much better as they can during this time, having as best we can a well thought out speed program, I think is what will translate the most. Having them do push-ups, finding a towel, rigging up a TRX somehow with a towel or a shirt on a door frame is great. And at least it gives some extra movement they can do back, if you've got a bar stool, of course. But are we going to hypertrophy now? Like maybe we would now. And that's just the acceptance. So even when I look at there, I look at how can I potentiate you? How can I give you an isometric that leads into a jump or something a little more ballistic? And then we are being a little bit more energy system dominant that way. But when it's outside, I think the best thing we can do is give them a speed program. Everyone has their body, and be it grass, be it pavement, whatever it may be. I think that's where we're getting the most bang for our buck right now.
Yeah, it's an interesting time, and Bob can jump back in too, but for baseball in that at this time, there would just be, the regular shitload of games and maybe
Right.
Some teams not getting the same amount of, not doing all these things training. But so this is a time when maybe you can work on what Bob's talking about, these general fitness qualities, although you're missing the specific stuff, but, maybe they haven't really had a time to develop that. So would you guys see this as an opportunity from the baseball? And I'll get Rob to jump in too, because we're talking about this a bit. So
I think it's a great opportunity. I think the biggest thing we can do is really get speed out of it. Typically, like you're saying, we'd be in games right now. So I look at this as here's an off season. We've got at least another 3 weeks to a month at a minimum, just because I would assume that MLB will give us probably a 2 to 3 week lead time. So whenever we hear from them that we're good to go, then we can ramp toward a little more specific. The question being, will gyms be open? Then we don't know. So right now, being able to build energy systems, build some speed, build some maybe repeat speed because we're out of season where we would be is a good effort for us. General strength is going to happen, but not really. Like general being push-ups and progressing those however best we can. I really think the best thing that'll be right now is speed. If guys will stick to it, I know motivation wanes at times. I know some guys who are having great spring training are maybe they're losing their motivation now and they're not staying focused. Maybe guys who had bad ones are realizing whenever it pops back up, hey, here's a chance to go redeem whatever I did too. And I think learning from you, I think learning that and being able to develop speed better and power better is the biggest thing we can work on right now because everyone at least has their body. Everyone has a towel so you can get some potentiation somehow and then jump. So I think those are the two biggest qualities we can hit right now from a lower body perspective.
Bob, similar opinion in terms of like, hey, this is when we can work on things we don't normally get time to work on at this time of the season?
Well, we're at in pro ball right now. We're at week 6, right, Sam?
Sorry, there. I could. Oh.
About week 6.
Yeah, week 5, 6, somewhere like that. I think we left on March 14th.
Talking to my boys in the big league. So right now, we're halfway through with an off season. My off season program in pro baseball was 12 weeks during about a 16-week span because you figure New Year's, Christmas, Thanksgiving, 4 weeks, a week moving in, moving out, and all that. So about 12 weeks. Now you're halfway through that program. So these kids are untrained now. I mean, you got to treat them like injured athletes, just at the least, right? But here's what you need to do. There need to be an assessment, some safe assessments, and this is where all this baseline stuff can come in, right? We do, which I think some of us have seen pretty common. We're doing 5 and 10 yard sprints. We can do them in our weight room. We set up the timing gates in there. Those are simple to do. Vertical jump, if you got force plates, that's important. So I mean, a vertical jump at a 5 and 10 yard sprint, and then I think the best assessment is what I've done over the last 10 or 15 years. I don't do tests anymore, especially after a layoff, because it's a waste of time. The people who are in shape will do good, and the people who aren't won't do good or get hurt, and then can't practice. So that's a waste. So what I say is, let's just take that program, make it part of the program. So let's say I'll write an 8-week program, and week 8, let's say, would be our first week back into practice. So I'm just finding out if you did all weeks 1 through 7. So if I don't need to run a 300-yard shuttle or a beep test to see where you've made mistakes. We all know that, 15 to 20 repeat strides with limited rest is enough to say, okay, you're not good. So, I mean, I think it's the assessment piece, but I really don't, trying not to do anything different. I mean, because if it was different, I would have already done it already. So I'm just following some of the weightlifting templates that I would normally do at this time of the year for the sports. If it's a dumbbell row, then I got to figure out how much weight you have, and is it a row or is it a reverse, pull up underneath a bar, and just trying to, make sure still, like, so for instance, just because upper body weight stuff is, largely push-ups and chair dips, right? Doesn't mean I can't. Doesn't mean I have to steer away from doing anything in the balance side. So I've got to do something going back there. So we've got to figure that out, and that's kind of what I do. So I don't think so. No, I mean, I'm following the same. I think I'm following what I've talked about before. No matter where you are and what you do, I think your philosophy has to be the same. It's the methods that can change, right? So I don't know if any of us would change what we were doing, whether we were at, Smith Junior High School or, working with, the Tokyo Giants. It'd be the same philosophy. It's just your resources would be different. So I'm not changing anything philosophically that I would do right now. I have a longer build-up time. So in the NC2A right now, we're under NC2A summer rules. So the coaches can't be involved. There's no, mandatory practices there. So I'm watching it. So I'm just, I went ahead and, again, there's some mental aspect to this too. So when I'm writing these programs for women's soccer, men's soccer, and women's volleyball, in the phase portion, I'm saying preseason. We're in preseason right now. When we come back, we're going to play. We have to prepare for it, even if we don't. So,
Thank you. We get Rob Panarello. Rob and I wrote an article. It's probably going to come out on Simply Faster this week, and it's just about this return to sport. But also, Rob does talk a lot about, the injury prevention perspective and some of the things that he would have people doing during this time. Rob, can you touch on a bit of what you'd focus on, but also even this idea of compliance? Like, it's nice to say, like, this is what we're going to do, but how do you get people to do it, especially when you don't see them?
Well, that's tough. I agree with what Sam and Bob has said. I don't think the sport matters unless it is track and field, where a guy like Mike Hurst can actually coach because he can teach sprinting and other things. I agree with Bob. I think it's getting people fit, and it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's getting them efficient as well, so that when they go back to practice, they're not going to be as strong and as powerful going back as they would be in a formal strength and conditioning with the facilities training, right? Most people are limited to their body weights, wherever it may be. So I do think you just have to get them fit, or whatever term you want to use, establish a work capacity, whatever it is, so that when they go back, especially if coaches are going to try to make up for the lost time, that they don't overtrain them, all right? And then, how efficient are they? If you work, they may not be able to improve their elastic abilities, but can they be more efficient when they take off in their elastic abilities? Those types of things. So I think that's important. How do you get them to be compliant? I don't know. I think that's the bell-shaped curve. You're always going to have the athlete that will run through a wall for you. You're going to have the athletes that they're going to be sitting on the fence, and it's the talent of the coach to pull them on their side. And I think there's always going to be people that, essentially you're chasing them to get to class and even show up for the cafeteria for meals, even though the meals are served for free of charge, right?
Right.
So, you got that bell-shaped curve. I don't think it changes now. I'm sure Bob probably called some people, and a third. Some are calling back within 5 minutes. Some are calling back within the day. Maybe some aren't even calling back, but I will say this, I think to become efficient and to achieve the things that you want to achieve, they have to be compliant in the program, just like anything else, whether it's rehab, training, studying for an exam, taking anything. You've got to be compliant in your work effort. So, but I don't think the sport matters. I don't. I think it's a factor of fitness and trying to become efficient in the qualities that they have.
Thanks, Rob. I'm going to jump to Mike Hurst. Mike, obviously you have a slightly different situation. You can do your one-on-one workouts. You can do your track workouts. And is there something you're focusing on now? Is it what you're doing, what Bob said, you're dropping into a preseason mode, which I think you are, but is there anything unique that you're doing at this time that's different than maybe what you would have done in a normal preseason period?
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Mike.
Well, the weights, we don't have the weights, just recently our gym guy loaned some of his $2,500 Olympic bars out to members of the group, and a few plates to work at home if they could. I agree with Bob, in terms of compliance. There's a lot of people who some people are really switched on and motivated, and some people it's sort of like, won't get back to you, won't call you back unless it suits them. At the moment, we are being as resourceful as we can. I'm treating it as a pre-season, not even a pre-season, off-season, general preparation, rebuild. And because everyone's just had a month off, or nearly everyone, so I have to sort of drip feed them back into the program, into some volume. It is an accumulation phase. I am working on a broad kind of a pyramid structure at the moment, but they're really short base. Like it's a 2 week of endurance, 2 weeks of speed and power. The only thing we can't work on, which we wouldn't work on at this time of year anyway, is maximum velocity, because we cannot get onto a safe track. We cannot get onto any synthetic rubber tracks. So we're working on acceleration. I'm working on cleaning up mechanics as I understand it. And then they get into their volume, body circuits for strength. I've got Ian Halpin annihilated himself on a self-designed body circuit. He did something like 45 minutes of continuous work, and then 2 days later did it again, and then it couldn't hardly walk the next day. And it was just body weights. He had one kettlebell, a med ball, a cable, and, you know, doing 10 reps of a menu of exercises for upper body, midriff and lower body. And the guy got serious DOMs, so we have to watch that out. And that's probably also because he was coming back from having the best part of a month off track. But he was also doing rappelling and stuff like that, you know, abseiling in the canyons of the Blue Mountains where he lives, and going for 14K walks through the mountains. And I thought, well, that guy, his general fitness has to be really good. But once you get a little bit more specific, the lesson is taught again. You know, it's a different kind of fitness. It's a different level of fitness. And but I'm really happy with the way we're going. And like Beck Bennett did 2 sets of 5 by 100 meters 2 days ago, and ran them all in high 12 seconds on grass, which is okay. You know, I run primarily a quarter mile program, so at this time of year, as I said, we're trying to build work capacity, and every now and then we'll slide into something that's a little bit quicker, a little bit more race specific. So yeah, nothing new. Totally agree with what Bob and Rob have said this morning. And honoured to be on the same panel with them.
The thing with the synthetic tracks, that's just because the government has essentially closed those facilities and there's no access, but you can't do it outside on in an open park.
There's one good, semi-good grass track. It gets too much work. They never top dress it. It's got ruts between the lane lines now, so I get my people to run 1 foot either side of the lane line, which I think I learnt from Charlie Francis, and hands to the line as a guidance mechanism. So that's been served us very well for years. Yeah, everything's shut down. All the gyms are still locked down. Every gym is locked down, apart from private ones in your own home garage or wherever. But all the private gyms are closed. All the government gyms are closed. The Institute of Sport is shut down. Even the biomech people are not allowed to be working. So in terms of testing, forget it. And we don't have the money to set up timing gates. And I rely very much on eye contact. So if I can eyeball the athlete, I can see where they're at, and I can pretty much predict what they'll run.
Yeah, and you were joking last week about like running in tall grass and stepping in a gopher hole or something like that, and then that actually happened.
It actually happened the next day. Damn it!
You put it in the universe.
Unbelievable! And I got so lucky she didn't break her ankle.
Yeah, I saw the video.
Kidding.
Yeah, I saw. Look, this damn hole was about 8 inches deep. What's it doing there? No one knows. I don't even think it was a rabbit hole. Just a hole in the ground, you know. So she didn't see it. It was full of the grass had actually been mowed, kind of slashed would be a better word, and it was just left there in drifts. And it had obviously they had filled this hole up with slashed grass. You couldn't see it. I walked up and down that hill 2 or 3 times to just check out and throw pine cones out of the road and things like that. But what are you going to do? She's okay. She came back. She did a great session about 3 days later. So,
Wow. Yeah, that was shocking to see that. I thought that was our fault, but whatever.
I sent you the video, right?
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
Ew.
Looks like there was a sniper. Yeah.
Yeah, she just went down like she'd been shot.
Yeah.
Wow, poor thing. Amy Petter, great girl, an architect that's come up from Hobart in Tasmania to build a couple of towers in the middle of the Sydney CBD. Smart lady.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. David Maris, you have your hand up there. You want to jump in?
Sorry, I've just unmuted myself. Yeah, like a couple of kind of points across my mind. One, in terms of what Bob was saying. So I'm not overly familiar with the NC2A rules and kind of legislations. But one of the thoughts I've had sort of in the past is sometimes the constraints that sometimes the collegiate rules place on coaching. Does that allow you to be like a little bit more focused and sort of cut out some of the fluff in terms of the training that may well be done? I'm thinking perhaps more specifically in track and field. That's my background. And coming from the UK, it's a purely amateur kind of club setup where you're not constrained by those rules. So that was sort of one of my thoughts. And sorry, I'll just get this in quickly as well. So with what Mike was saying in terms of not being able to do some of the max velocity stuff, do you think that there's a way that perhaps some quote unquote poor coaching can sort of hide behind this in terms of that they're going to be able to get away with perhaps inappropriate volumes because they're not hitting the intensities that they were, and then perhaps when it carries back out onto the track, they're going to kind of see some issues in that.
Yep, for sure. Well observed and well predicted, and people will start to move people. 400-meter runners will move up to the 8. You can see it coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but if you're trying to produce a 2.4 runner, I don't see the necessity to run 8s. My guys will have a race occasionally over 800, but it's just fun, really. Although they would say no one runs an 8 for fun.
Yeah, no kidding.
Anything over 100 is not fun.
And sorry, yeah, Bob, bringing it back to you, kind of, like I say, the collegiate stuff's a bit out of my realm of expertise, but I mean, I've had that sort of thought before, that sometimes the constraints can be an advantage. And could you see the fact that everything can become a little bit close to having some kind of benefit?
For sure. When this thing started, I was in no hurry, especially with, basketballs and, well, really all the sports, to be honest with you. But, collegially, coaches, all those kids are overtrained. Well, I shouldn't say they're overtrained. They're overpracticed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would say, I use this just to sell a point, but I'll go ahead and use it in this case too, even if it's not exact. When the overwhelming majority of schools, 300 and something odd Division I schools, are overtraining their athletes in terms of practice loads. So I think that there's a benefit that this thing happened there. I mean, I bet it took a couple, 3 weeks for the basketball kids. I know in one of our teams to recover, and I'm not so sure that the female soccer team wasn't as lucky as well, if you could use a term like that in these chaotic and catastrophic times. But I also think that, for us, David, the strength coaches aren't really blocked from doing much.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So, but thankfully the sport coaches are. There's a period where they can, so right now we're in summer rules, which is voluntary training only. And it used to be like, oh, you can't write a program, you can't supervise them. Well, now we know we've changed that because the interpretation of the rule is health and safety. So, of course we're going to write a program. I don't want them doing what they want to do on their own, which would be either 0 or some whacked out version of 0. So we'll write the workout. Anytime we spot somebody or have them come in the room, that's for their health and safety, mm-hmm. right? And the other part is it's voluntary, which means it can't hint of anything mandatory. So I can't report absences or attendance. I can't report progress. I can't be handing out testing and assessment metrics to the sport coaches. I can do all that, but I don't have to, and I can say, okay, if you're going to train, I'm going to be in here from 10 to 11.
Right.
And so they just show up at 10 to 11. So that part is not all that bad, but I think that this thing is going to put some coaches, both sport coaches and performance practitioners, at a distinct disadvantage because they're not going to be good enough to handle it. I mean, that's my frank and earnest.
I mean, I definitely think it comes across as a learning experience. I think that, kind of coming through something so unprecedented, then it's going to be very difficult not to take something positive away from it in terms of making everybody a better practitioner kind of moving forward.
Well, they're definitely going to learn. I think we're all going to learn something, whether it's, well, I don't think there's any question. And I think there's also that learning is going to come, there's going to be some accidental learned experiences too, right? Because this thing is just an unusual deal.
Yeah, I mean, I had sort of a very brief conversation with Harry Akins-Ayiti, who's a UK sprinter. And, he's on the grass at the moment doing his hills for his acceleration work. And it just sort of makes me wonder, like, in 12 months' time, if people get to come out and have a bit of a late track season in Europe and they're running surprisingly well, is this going to impact the type of training that they do next year because they've stumbled upon a happy accident with the training they've been doing this year? I don't know.
I would say that's going to be, I think it's going to be 100% for all of us. I mean, it's because we're going to get a result out of what we're doing.
Yeah.
So when we see that, we're going to go, whoa, and many of us say this, many of us have, that I'm looking at right now, I'm sure have said the same thing, we're doing too much or we're not doing enough. Well, whatever that ends up being, we're going to see now for sure. Because when we're done, I know I'm doing assessments immediately. I mean, on where we're at for more than anything, practice. But to get good, to see how they're going to go to practice, it's going to have to be a baseline. If in the event something happens where, these kids. Plus, too, I found out, and many of you may have found the same thing, that there's nothing else for anybody to do, right? So I found out, oh, coach, I went out for a 20-minute, my soccer kids, who I do no distance running with at all. Oh, I went out for a 20-minute run. Really, how'd that work out for you? Oh, my back and knees hurt. Right. Okay. So what I told you was, don't do that. Number one. Number two, well, the program is really easy. Well, we're not going to start in week 8 in the first week. And I'm a ramp up guy, right? So, you give me 16 weeks, I'm taking all 16. So, you're going to find out. So the kids are going to learn a little bit, but I think we are too, because this is a training volume that I've never put out before. So now I get an idea of what this is about, because we're usually lifting weights and practicing 5 days a week. So that certainly influences everything, all of us, right? So we may be coming up with a gym.
Yeah.
I hate to interject, but Bob, and I think Dash, this I know for you as well. Do you guys run the conditioning for your teams, or do most of the sport coaches end up handling that, or is that switching throughout the year as well? Because I know that's something that you guys have to take into consideration as well. So I don't know how it's run for you guys, but curious to hear.
Well, I'll answer first, and Dash can hop on. We run all the conditioning. And I know I do with my teams. So we're a little bit strapped because we only have 2 full-time coaches, and I kind of pinch hit in there to make it 3. Now we're looking for a director, so we only have 1. But in the meantime, I try to get out there on so soccer, we usually go out and do our fitness twice a week. And whether it be in season or off season. Well, I make it a point to absolutely make that. So they don't do any other fitness around it. I monitor that directly and distinctly.
It's just me. So it's team based on the sport coach. My soccer coaches, they do it themselves. I give them kind of guidelines. One coach follows it. The other coach, she does her own thing. She's been there long enough where it's just kind of her call and there's nothing I can really do about it. But my basketball coaches, I run the fitness for them. So it's just based on the sport and the coach, how they want to go about it. So it's different at D2, right? I don't really have as much say as I'd like to. So I kind of like try to educate them and give them what I think they should do. But in their eyes, they've been there longer and they know what they're doing. So I can't tell them what to do. I just kind of give them the knowledge and hopefully they make the right decision. But half my coaches, I run it for half the sports.
Yeah, you pick your spots. Sport coaches love being educated. I I had a number of calls this week with pro sport like NBA and NHL, and the reason I categorize them together is because they're both thinking that they might have a playoff in late August or whenever. And so the NBA plan was like 10 days of individual workout. So one player comes in with one coach and trains with them, and then after that 10-day period, they cycle through that. They do a 15 days of practice, and then they would start their playoff, and they don't even know what the playoff would look like. 7-game, 3-game playoff series, March Madness. They don't know yet. So that's one of the things that was posed to me. And I think the NHL's kind of the same, and they're just trying to figure out what to do. Some teams aren't doing much. Some teams are being very proactive about getting players doing stuff right now. I'm going to get Francois to jump in and talk about his experience with some of the ice hockey players. But there's huge variability in terms of like one of the basketball teams said, "Oh, we got a guy that doesn't want to do anything. He's told us outright he's doing nothing." I said, "Well, does he like doing anything?" He's like, "He likes doing arm curls." Well, I said, "Well, you're going to do an arm curl, then a front squat, then an arm curl, then a press, whatever. Just revolve everything around arm curls." So whatever. But there is going to be huge variability in what the team members have done when they come back. And so you're starting from different, starting points, right? Francois, did you want to jump in about what you're hearing about NHL players right now and what they're doing and what you're trying to do with at least the players that you're dealing with?
Yeah, hello, everybody. Really, like you told everybody, it's really complicated right now because you have guys that's been working hard for the past 6 weeks, and you have guys that did absolutely nothing. So for the guys that I train, some of them had full access to their practice facility, and they've been training nonstop for the past 5 weeks. But some of the guys, they did absolutely nothing. So I don't know. They're still thinking that maybe they're going to start in July, August, and do playoffs there, and have another like the next season start maybe a month later, so November. But we still have no idea of what's going on. But for everybody else, for all the players in junior major, AHL, East Coast, all the leagues in overseas, it's not a huge problem right now. We're just in that, rehab GPP phase. So it's way easier for them to prepare because we still have a lot of time. They're preparing for next season, but for all the NHL players right now, it's really a mess and really complicated. Like you say, there's such a huge difference between teams and between the players. It's going to be a pretty interesting picture when they have a set date and when they want to start like the season, because it's going to be like really problematic for sure. Because I'm sure a lot of the guys, they did absolutely nothing for the past 6 weeks. So it's going to be interesting to see what's going on.
Yeah, there was one team I was talking to. They're saying, like, from what they're hearing, some teams who will make this playoff, who are in playoff contention, they're doing stuff. And then you got the teams that they're like, we're not going to make the playoffs anyway. So they're not doing anything. But there may not be playoffs. It might just be transitioning into the next season. So you should be doing something, I would think, Francois. Like,
everybody should be doing something. But, with these pro athletes, it's like that player in the NBA. If that guy doesn't want to do anything, he's not going to do anything. And unfortunately, like, we don't have any power over that. So, but it's going to be for some of these players, it's going to be like probably it might be a career-ending thing, if they're not prepared well, because some of the guys, they're preparing really well right now and they're ready to go. And some of these guys, they're really looking for an edge. And like I told you, some of the guys that I train, they've been training for 6 weeks, like pretty much every day. So, and they have, some of them even have ice access in their facility. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see when we have a set date and everything's going back to I don't think it's going back to normal pretty soon. But if they decide to start the season in July, you still have guys that have been doing nothing for the past 6 weeks, you know?
Yeah, that's crazy. Rob, Panarello, what are your thoughts on this? If you have this extreme variability in readiness, fitness levels, or sorry, preparedness and fitness levels coming back, and they're like, okay, let's start practicing or training. Like, how do you manage that if you're a performance director?
I think you got a problem, right? I think you have to manage the coach more than anything else, because you know, if people have done nothing and everybody has, and other people have done everything they're required to do, then you're going to put them on the ice or on the court or on the field. I don't think you're going to change the practice schedule for individuals, you know, and they're all going to go. And I think the chips are going to fall where they may, whether it's soft tissue injuries, whether somebody who's strong and fast hits somebody who's not, and you know, you have that type of an injury, or you know, just people can't even recover, right? So it may not be day one, but what if they can't recover and they keep falling further and further behind until they get to some type of fitness level? I guess there are, there's an old saying that you can't play yourself into shape, and I've always been an advocate of that. But maybe with people coming in at lower levels of fitness, maybe they can, you know, based on this environment. I don't know, but unless you're going to break down practice where, okay, these are people who are out of shape and these are people who are in shape, which I don't think you can do, because you have X period of time when the season is going to start. And either you're ready to start the season or you're not. I agree with Francois. I think there's going to be opportunity for people that they're going to make teams that maybe in a normal scenario wouldn't have. I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah, like did you guys watch the NFL draft? I'm watching that and going, do these younger guys have a better shot now? Because maybe they will have done a little more physical prep, and you know, I don't know. What do you think about that, Rob? Like,
I don't know, maybe. I mean, I saw a thing with New Orleans Saints said that they are officially not going to have off-season training. So I'm assuming some players will take it upon themselves to do something. But the way I interpreted that was that, you know, the strength coaches or the performance director or whatever is not going to have any access to the players. I mean, the Saints have said just stay safe, stay healthy, and they expect everybody to show up in camp in shape. And I'm sure some will. I'm sure some won't. I don't know.
Not even like a, you know, sort of virtual. Like, I've heard this word, virtual off-season training.
Right. There's no virtual off-season training. Correct.
Wow.
I heard that this week. So, I just think you have to be self-accountable to you. You have to be self-accountability. You have to do what you're supposed to do under the direction of the people who you report to.
Wow, that's crazy.
They're not going to stop the start date. You're going to be ready or you're not.
Yeah. Yeah, I do have a connection with Trueform treadmills. If anybody wants a treadmill sent to an athlete, I'm arranging that with them. So we're going to do sprint training. And you'll see, if you look at some of my Instagram, I have my son, we put a green screen behind him when he's sprinting on the treadmill. And then I drop that in a football game setting. So you see him on the treadmill running. I got a basketball one coming out tomorrow. I'll have an ice hockey one for you, Francois. So it'll look odd, but whatever, we'll do it. Sam Feldman, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah. I know based on what Rob was saying and based on Bob said it a bit before, like assessments and testing, like waiting with testing is smart, and assessing obviously what we need to ensure safety is good. I was trying to see if I could send a picture in here, but I couldn't. I know Alan Bishop tweeted about, I forget where it was from, like a minimum effective dose. And I think figuring that out and figuring out the dynamics of how minimal that can be, where we can even maybe go a little bit above it throughout to kind of push toward what we would normally be doing, I think is something, unfortunately, we don't have a way to truly quantify it, but it's something that we can really keep in mind as we continue to build whoever's back. And like Francois was saying, if you're being an idiot and sitting on your ass the whole time right now, you're ruining your own career. I mean, that's on whoever is doing that, of the multiple guys who I'm sure are. but figuring out where that minimum is with an assessment, questionnaire form, all that, and how we can keep building on that, I think is one of the best things we can take into account right now.
Yeah, Brian Miller, do you have some lines of communication with athletes and getting a sense of what they're doing, and if you guys do come back for August training camp, like, will things be in the right place?
Yeah, we have a fair amount of communication with our athletes, but like Bob Alejo said, there's no way that we can really monitor it or make it mandatory. So, you know, it's a roll of the dice, to be honest, to see how much they're actually doing. You know, one thing that keeps going through my mind is, even if they're doing the workouts that we send them, they're going to be executed in such a different fashion because they're by themselves. They're not there in a competitive environment with their teammates. So the results that we think they should be getting from this workout, in our mind, it's kind of jaded because we're interpreting it as these would be the results that they would get in a competitive environment with their teammates. And they're not. So just like, I mean, a lot of people are doing GPP work. Well, I think you're only getting half of that because they're not in a competitive environment. But I think a lot of what I find ironic is, you know, when a lot of these teams were back in, you know, normal, all you hear about is culture. Oh, we got the greatest culture out there. We got the greatest culture with our team. Our culture is better than yours. And now you really don't hear that. You know, so I think there's a lot of teams that are struggling with that component of it. And that's where the testament to the training and the training environment comes from. You know, I look at the workouts that are out there, and again, I kind of chuckle sarcastically, but, you know, we've all met those strength coaches who, you know, they live and die by neck work, right? It's like, oh, if you're not doing neck work the very first thing, then you're the worst strength coach in the world. Well, I don't see anybody programming neck work right now, you know, and that's kind of across the sport. You know, your favorite exercise, Derek, you know, the Nordic ham curls. I mean, I don't see anybody programming that, and that's an easy one that they can do. So I think it's kind of separating strength coaches into the ones who are truly dependent on, they have to have a barbell, or they're able to think outside the box and program exercises, programming an actual training system that doesn't have to have a barbell. And I think that's what we're seeing. I know that's a rant on a lot of different topics.
Well, would you say that, like what Bob Alejo was saying in terms of like, oh, people are used to coming in and having the TV screens and a nice layout and everybody gets their workstation. Is there a dependency that builds up now? And even that culture statement, like the culture is great because you're there on them, maintaining that culture, whatever, imposing the culture, whatever you want to call it. But as soon as, you know, just like if I try to overprotect my child and I let them go into the world, they'll be unprepared. Do you think there's something about making people a little more self-sufficient when we come back so that we don't run into these problems, Brian?
Well, that's what a real training program should do. We should be making educated, self-sufficient athletes, and not just in the 4 or 5 years that we have them in college, but, you know, with their life, you know, beyond our control. So we are relying on a lot more self-motivation compared to, you know, coach-created motivation. So absolutely, that is a big challenge.
Yeah, well, I'm sure some of these coaches could like create their own little Spotify shouting, ranting, you know, tracks that people can play while they're working out or doing their planks at home, like, and somebody strength coach screaming at them. So that'll be interesting. Rob Penarelli, you want to jump in just based on what you put in the chat there around the culture and accountability?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm a big believer that the running of a team or a sport organization is the same thing as running a business organization. It really is. If you have a head coach and you have your offensive coordinator and your head strength coach and your head trainer, is no difference than a CEO having his senior vice president, and department director. The two things that I believe is that, in my experience, what gets measured is what gets done. You want something done, measure it, because that's what makes people accountable. And you have to be accountable, right, to the objectives or the processes you've put in place. People have to be held accountable, or else why should they do it? And the big problem is that as you go through things and you become successful, it's difficult to sustain that success because people get apathetic, or, you know, I worked so hard and now we're successful. Why do I have to keep working as hard? And so why do they have to keep working as hard? Because you're accountable to this task. You're accountable to your position. You're accountable to the team, whatever it may be. And, you know, if you're not going to hold them accountable, I mean, I find it ridiculous, and we all know this happens. If I have to chase someone to make sure that they went to class, where's their accountability to the team in practice and training and on the field of play, especially in crucial situations? How can I depend on them in those situations if I can't even depend on them to wake up and go to class on their own? So, you know, accountability to me is culture. And culture to me is everything. And if you want something to get done by your athletes or your staff, measure it. And don't just measure to measure. Measure so that you achieve information that's going to be pertinent to the success of the organization or the team. And then hold people accountable for the objectives of the things they're supposed to do as a result of what you get is information from what you've measured. So that's the problem now. The reason why Francois has half his players not doing anything is because maybe, you know, or Bob with the NCAA now with rules and stuff, because I don't have to answer to you right now. I'm in my off season. It's the rules of the league. You know, you're not supposed to be in touch with me, whatever the things may be. But if they were accountable, if it was going to cost them money, if it was going to cost them their job, if it was going to cost them the position on the team, it was going to cost them a starting position versus sitting the bench, I guarantee everybody'd be working out.
Yeah, it was interesting to see that Tom Brady thing where it's like, oh, he got kicked off the field, or, you know, some city official, whatever, kicked him off the field because he was out training. But that, I almost wonder if that was kind of planted so that he could send a message that I'm trying to get out there and I'm going to try to, you know, show people that I'm working out and, you know, made the headlines and all that. So that was kind of interesting. Maybe, you know, to the Tampa Bay team, like, hey, this is what I do. This is how I operate. This is part of my culture. You know, obviously you don't want to get arrested for doing that, but you talk about accountability and you talk about measuring. What's the consequence if there isn't accountability? Like, especially in a pro team, like how would you look at that in terms of like, okay, you use this guy as an example, suspend him. Obviously fines don't work if they're making 20 million a year or whatever. What are your thoughts on the consequence behind creating that accountability?
There has to be consequences, or else why should someone do something? You know, you look at a guy like Belichick. Whether you like Belichick, don't like Belichick, like New England, don't like New England, he'll bring people in. He'll trade for somebody and then cut him a week later. You're going to conform to the way they're going to run things. You know, Coach Parcells, when he went to New England, you know, every team he went to was not very good record-wise before he got there. And there's a story where, I don't remember the player's name, there was a starting offensive guard, and he told this offensive guard, listen, your fitness and your participation in this program is very important to me. And the player went home, didn't participate in the off-season program, and came back. And back then, this was in the early 90s, I think it was, they used to run 300-yard shuttles. So the first one he made, the second one he ran like his son was on his back. And the third 300 shuttle he ran when like the whole family was on his back, and he collapsed in the end zone. And head trainer's name was a guy named Ron O'Neill, and Ron O'Neill ran into the end zone to make sure the play was okay. And Coach Parcells has a voice that will carry, and he's about on the 30, 40-yard line, and you hear this voice, hey, O'Neill. When he wakes up, tell him he's cut. And I guarantee you some heads spun and they were like, oh my God, there's a new sheriff in town. He cut his starting offensive guard because he wasn't in shape during testing. Now, do you do that to everybody? You're going to get rid of your starting quarterback? No, I think when it comes to accountability, I think there's a difference between discipline and rules. And I think that you don't have to be fair with everyone. I think you have to be right. Okay, people are different. Violations are different. There are people who are going to repetitively have violations versus people who make a mistake once. So I just think you have to hold people accountable, and to hold people accountable, there's got to be consequences. And the way you hold people accountable is by being right. You don't have to be fair all the time, but you do have to be right.
Yeah, and Francois and I had talked about this too, about just like the recruitment and the selection of the right people to create that air of that culture of accountability, and you have responsible individuals. It was interesting watching the NFL draft because I was kind of looking at, you see the coaches and the GMs in their houses, and I'm seeing like, oh, what does his house look like? And, the guy from Minnesota had like, things that he had killed, the heads of them on the wall. And then Cliff Kingsbury looked like he had a bachelor, layout or whatever. So it was just interesting seeing that and what kind of, where these people are coming from. But Francois, like, we talked about this, like getting the right people in the door in the first place when something like this happens. How important is that?
It's huge. I mean, especially here in Drummondville with our team, with the Voltigeurs, the junior major team that I train. It made a huge difference this year. Like I told you, we were not supposed to be in the playoffs. We finished 6th, but we just drafted and got the right players to play for us this year. We had no big stars, no draft players, but we had the right players in place, and we had good people, good kids, and it made a huge difference,
Yeah, and if you don't have those people, like people are just chatting about the conditioning tests, like what is an acceptable conditioning test to make sure that people have been complying? Like Bob, maybe you want to start with this. You talked about assessing and all that. I mean, what's the bare minimum assessment wise so you can go like, okay, this person has been accountable or they haven't, and maybe sending a message to everybody else like, hey, we had to do this, you failed. What do you think, Bob, in terms of the risk involved in that, but also the applicability of it?
Well, I just thought I was getting ready to answer Brian on this. And oh, by the way, Brian, I just sent out a tweet that here, I'll tell you exactly what it says. On your behalf. How about that? As an old friend. I was on a podcast recently, and it was mentioned how seldom we see social media pointed towards discussing or professing how much culture is important. Still important, isn't it? So we'll see what happens. So I don't know. I believe in conditioning tests if you're going to test the training. If it has nothing to do with the training, then we're not doing it. So in other words, we stopped all that in Northridge. We don't do any of those unless it's, based on sport-specific energy sources in the training program, right? So, for soccer, I like to do the 300-yard shuttle along with several other things. We like to, 5-10, 20-yard sprint with 5-10 splits, vertical jumps, for all that other stuff. But I'm really testing repeat sprint ability at that time. So I like the 300-yard shuttle. I'm comfortable with it. I've used it for years now. And so when we come back, we do that. But I don't, it's like, if you don't pass, well, what happens is, I know when I arrived there, I'm understanding there was team captains and starters that weren't passing the test. So I said, well, what's the use in having the test then? You're going to play those kids, right? Okay, well, then now you've lost everybody who's not a first team player, so that's a mistake. So what we do in an analysis of that is, here's the test. I'm going to test to see if you've done what I told you to do, and then grade it out in terms of standard deviations. That way, if it's not a number, because we have a population, right? And it's our population. It's not, Man United. It's not Boston University. It's ours. So it's better to test against what we have than it is anything else. But I don't know. I'm totally against, you don't get your gear if you don't all pass the test. you know, and we all know there's been some just stupid ass tests. They don't make any sense at all. And they, you know, it typically would come from the sport coach, and it doesn't test anything we've done, you know? So I say, no, we're not doing that. And so we're at a point where we're going.
David, did you have your hand up? I'm not sure if that was from before, but you can jump
Yeah,
in.
no, sorry, I did keep my hand up. I'll put my hand up again. Yeah, just to touch on that point in terms of what Bob was saying there, in terms of knowing what you're testing. And really, it just brings on an anecdote that I had from back when I was a wannabe sprinter back in the UK. We did 6-8 weeks of real kind of general prep stuff for sprinting, you know, like a typical kind of high volume British sort of winter training. And then 8 weeks in, the coach had set up a battery of tests, 30 meters from blocks, a flying 30. And so a week before this, he said he wanted us to run out of blocks and do a sprint so that we were ready for the test. And even then I was thinking, well, this test isn't reflecting, it's not working on any of the qualities that we've addressed in training. So, you know, just sort of what Bob said just made that really resonate with me in terms of that the test has got to be relevant for what you've been doing. Otherwise, we're just testing to say we've done a test, really. And then throwing something in last minute to prepare for the test isn't, I don't know, it's like turning up to a math test, having studied English for 6 weeks and then 3 days out, doing a little bit of math just so you're ready for it. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but I'd say, like Brian, I know you've heard this too. So you get the whole like, well, we want to run the mile test or a mile with a little rest and then a repeat 800. And you just tell them like, well, this doesn't make any sense at all. And then the response from the sport coach is, well, is it really going to hurt anything? And I say, there's design programs on that. You know, like what? Well, is it going to make a difference, or it's not going to hurt anything? I don't want to do something that doesn't hurt. You know, that doesn't. It's not going to make a difference. Why do it then? It's the stupidest, you know, thing. And of course, everybody on this thing must have had that conversation one time or 1,000 times. That you get well, is it really going to hurt? No. Why? Sometimes the answer is no, but why do that? It's the stupidest thing.
Yeah, Rob, you know, going back to the Parcells example, like as long as the test is in line with what you've been training for and it is a valid indication of, you know, your fitness based on the training program, even, you know, if somebody didn't do the training program and gets devastated by it, is that still appropriate in your opinion? You know?
I think, yeah, I do, because it's not about the test at that point in time. It's about not meeting the expectations that you were informed about months prior. Let me give you an example. I'm gonna have to weigh in on the first day of training camp, and I have 6 months to lose 30 pounds, right? And I come in and I'm 2 pounds overweight. I'm 1 pound overweight. Why should I give that to you? Because we're buddies, because, you know, I'm just gonna, okay, I won't ruffle feathers, I won't do this, you know? I wouldn't give it to the guy. He had 6 months to lose the weight, you know? Now, obviously, there's various circumstances that may arise that, you know, would impact the decision, but, you know, Coach Parker had a great line for it. When if guys miss by 1 or 2 pounds, and they complained, he'd say, now listen, if I lied for you, I'd lie to you. And you wouldn't want me to do that, would you? And that was a great line that they can't even argue with you.
It's a good one.
So, you know, so again, it's not the 2 pounds. It's not that they weren't in shape, but, you know, I mean, that is a factor. It was a factor of that you didn't do what you were supposed to do. You weren't accountable to yourself. You weren't disciplined to yourself. So, you know, it's a message like going forward. How can I depend on you when you're here? That's how I look at it, more than the 2 pounds or collapsing in the end zone.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any? I just want to open it up. Like if somebody else wants to talk about what they're doing for testing or planning to assess people when they come back, any thoughts on that, on what's appropriate, what you know, is in line with what you're already doing, or are you at the mercy of some sport coach who wants to do something absolutely nuts, and that you're trying to battle that as well? Any thoughts on that, Ryan?
As the head coach, I make all the tests that I want to make, and we make sure that we run those tests every year, that I have the same coaches running those tests off every year. And that way there's some consistency in the errors that might be made, so the data is still valid. And then we've used that data to make some predictions in terms of personnel placement. And then I run a lot of those tests with my athletes year to year, even if those tests might not be very specific to their event, because I'm dealing with developmental athletes who are maturing and improving. And we might end up finding out that now they've developed some relative skills and they understand the training program. They're a little bit more bodily aware. They now can move in a different way, and we can move them into a different event. So like most of my athletes in my program will test over the hurdles every year. They'll test the javelin, the shot put, the discus every year, because just them visualizing that and seeing those events, learning vicariously, there's been a lot of learning done in that regard. In terms of fitness, I don't really test and time trialed, specific fitness test until about 3 weeks in. But we do test power, speed, jump ability, reactive ability, body awareness in terms of gymnastics and skill sets like that, throwing implements, things like that are low impact, just to see where they're at. And, I don't have to go have them puke on the ground and vomit and roll around on their back, filled up with hydrogen ion and lactic acid to know what they've done or what they haven't done. And part of that's because not only am I the head coach, but I guess I'm also their fitness coach because I'm the one training them in the off season. So I'm fully aware of who's present in the training and who's not. So, it's a little different for me as a high school coach versus a, therapist or a trainer or a strength and conditioning person.
Well, it's going to be interesting because as we go back, I don't think anything's going to be normal. So if we go back to a training camp and then you have a season, is there going to be some leniency here? So like we go back, it's going to be this weird progression back. There's going to be injuries. There's going to maybe to some of the star players because of just the way this is going. Do you think somebody would be at risk of losing their job because this is such a crazy time right now? So we go through, you have, let's say NFL, they go through and, the Cleveland Browns win the Super Bowl, who knows, whatever. And then all these other teams are at the bottom. Like, is this coach going to get fired because this is a weird year? Or do we go like, okay, that was a kind of a shit show. Now we're back. What do you think, Rob? And I'll get Bob to jump in.
Yeah, I don't think anything changes in regards to that because everybody's coming back from the same difficult situation. Everybody's coming back with the players who work, the players who aren't in shape, and everybody in between. I think everybody's coming back on the same playing field, so to speak, right? They're coming out of the environment of dealing with the coronavirus and the limitations it has placed on practice, training, and everything else. So the playing field is level, and from my perspective, and thus, if a team does not do as well as their expectations, maybe you get a little bit of leniency, but so what if the Cleveland Browns win the Super Bowl? God bless them. If a team didn't meet their expectations, then we'll go back to accountability, right? And so, you could give all the excuses in the world. Either you're going to accept excuses or you're going to make people accountable for the job they're supposed to do. I'm sure there'll be some leniency because I shouldn't say I'm sure, who knows, right? Because it's such a unique situation, but bottom line is everybody's in the same situation. So the expectations, why should they change? Right? I don't know if it's leniency or if it's adjustments that need to be made, right? Due to the situation, which is different than being lenient. It's just being smart with regards to the talented people I have running my organization, the talented people I have running my team and conditioning and taking care of the medical care of my athletes under these circumstances. What adjustments are we going to make for the benefit of our athlete and to give us an advantage over our competitors? And leniency's got nothing to do with that.
Yeah, because if we go back to what Francois said, and there's teams that are doing a lot of things, and even my discussions with some of the NBA teams, there's a couple of NBA teams who are doing a lot of things, and then there's a couple that aren't really doing anything. If it comes out that those teams that didn't do much have more injuries and don't do as well, mm-hmm. Is somebody in the front office going, holy shit, how come we didn't do more? Like, who's accountable for that?
What would you do if you were the owner? What would you say if you were the owner, right? What's different? What's different? It's always keeping up with the Joneses. right? So, we didn't do these things. We didn't do as well. You're accountable.
Yeah, because Bob, I'll get you to jump in because I was talking to some private gym owners, and they're looking at what their employees, who they might still be paying, what are you guys doing like virtually? What are you doing to keep the business going? What do you? And so they're kind of looking at everybody, going, okay, who am I going to keep moving forward? Bob, what do you think?
Well, I mean,
Like, is there a threat of cuts even at these universities? Like, are they going to have to cut staff? Are they going to have to cut
Yeah.
programs? And
It's already happened.
yeah.
It's already happened. It's already been furloughed. Sports, I think, I think we're a little bit more resilient in that we don't have football and a giant basketball arena, right? So you have a football is funding about 95 and some odd % of the rest of the school. Without a football season, you better have good accountants and good backing. That's all I can say. I mean, that's going to be tough. But like Rob said, which, I happily never disagree with, is that it's the same shit. Like, we all got the same stuff. And I think it's just as easy as well, actually, I think it makes it easier because when a school like Northridge plays basketball against UCLA, which a lot of the smaller mid-majors do early in the year, there's an expectation, but it's different because we don't have the same resources that they have. It's a different program. So do we want to win? Well, hell yeah, we want to win. Do we want to lose by 50? We shouldn't. It's not unlikely. But so, now you can that discussion's a little bit more nebulous, right? Well, you're not really UCLA, but San Diego State's a little bit closer to where you at. Why aren't we playing them well? And then baseball and the soccer, I was able to be part of a national championship at Santa Barbara as a mid-major. So soccer is, you can win as a mid-major. Why are we not doing that? And then you can discuss about the field and the money and all that. But now, like Rob said, we all got the same stuff. So if you go through a group of teams and whatever, and there's a big rash of injuries on one team and not the rest of the conference, that's the problem. Or if you have a big rash on one team and the rest of the department's not, like this, to me, buy-in and all that's run by the sport coach. I mean, you're going to have a good program as strength and conditioning director. But in the end, we don't write the lineup. They don't have to satisfy me in that way. They do have to do that to the sport coach. So he should be the one that lifting's important, the trainer's important, nutrition's important, sports psychology important. So if they don't, if we all of a sudden find out, and we're going to find out that your team wasn't compliant during this thing, that's the head coach's fault. That's not mine. I didn't recruit them. I don't call the plays. I don't write the lineup. So I think they better find out. It's funny because I was just kind of revealing this in my own mind as Rob was talking that, it'll be very clear, much more clear than in normal situations because there's so much money and facility and backing going on that you kind of have to, that's not the kid we can get. Even within conferences, right? It's tough. So for us, right, we're in the Valley, but we're not Long Beach on the water. We're not Fullerton down by Irvine. We're not, so that's a different kind of kid. Santa Barbara's right on the beach. But now we're all in the same place. So I think it'll be easy to be able to say, okay, like I said before, when you're in school and everything's cool, now those kids, where was your mandate? Where was your culture and accountability, coach? So I do think it's going to be much easier now than in a normal situation to say, you're not our guy anymore. You're not our woman anymore.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to magnify everything, right? So, Sam, did you want to jump in and comment on some of this stuff?
Yeah, I was talking to Kier earlier this week, and there are two things I've wondered, and one thing he had a strong opinion on as well. One being how for sports, for pro that is, like when you have the difference in an off-season trainer and just us as strength coaches, and even I guess for college too, like what's our sliding scale necessarily of when it becomes an off-season trainer's fault versus a strength coach's and accountability and all that. And then also now when we look at coming back, is this a year where we finally get judged on injury rates more than anything, or is likability going to win out versus injury rates? Because right now everyone's in the same area that they're in with lack of equipment for most people. Those who have a gym, great, they're at an advantage. But otherwise, like this year is a good year to look at injury rates instead of likability comparatively.
Yep. Good point. Ryan Banta, you're a likable guy. What do you think?
I have to be likable with this fugly mugger. I would not be getting many of anything, let me tell you. But I would say that, I think one of the things that is going to be a special consideration for this year is the fact that if you are an established coach and you've been successful for a really long time and you have a monumentally horrible year, I don't know that you're going to get fired if, again, you do have a little bit of that likability factor and you're not an a-hole and you don't have a cantankerous relationship with ownership, administrator, whatever, and I think that that's something that it is a unique circumstance, and it is something that a coach in a conversation evaluating the season or in a room with the boss or with a chancellor or principal is going to say, look, like, this is incredibly unusual. And I think the other thing that I don't know if you guys have talked about because I jumped on late is, as a strength and conditioning person, it's a real odd spot to be in for most sports. Are we going to play this year? Are we not going to play this year? If we're not playing this year, then there's things that I probably want to get done with my athletes that are under contract or at my university or my college or my high school that I would do very differently than if I'm assuming, hey, we're in the NBA and we're jumping into playoff basketball. Well, that's going to look a lot different. My conversation with a strength coach in the NBA about 2 years ago, we sat down and had a long talk. And he basically said his job has nothing to do with strength and conditioning. It has to do all with restoration. Just keep these guys healthy through the regular season because of the brutality that is NBA basketball with the number of games and stuff. So I think that's the problem of being in this where are we, what are we doing kind of zone that is so problematic because you don't know what to do. Even for me as a high school coach, when we were still under the assumption that we're going to have some sort of track and field season, I was training my kids very differently than I would if, okay, now my distance kids were moving into cross country and my sprint kids are moving into their different sports, whatever they may be doing. How I handle that, how I deal with that, when it's definitive, it's much nicer for the personnel so we can plan and we can prepare. When we're up in the air, there's a lot of anxiety to that because we just don't know, okay, what's the next right step, the next right decision.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. Like this idea that likability is going to be part of this too, right? Like if I'm going like, well, we got to trim the budget here and Dash is a real asshole, so let's get rid of him or something like that. Like that's going to come up. I'm sure that's part of it too. Like, is strength and conditioning an essential service if we go through this for the next year? I don't know. Adrian, Bazemore, what do you have to comment on here?
My question is, actually, it was more of a question / statement. Once this is all said and done, and Derek, I think you and I've talked, I know David and I talk, Sam and I talk dang near every day, Coach Aleo and everybody else, how are these kids, high school, college, pro, how are they going to move? Are they going to go back to their old habits? Are they going to go back to doing dumb stuff the way they were moving? Because, I know a lot of us work with, I work with a ton of college kids, like some of you guys in the summer, and they make them fast. And it's like, I see even NFL guys, I'm like, dude, you're running wrong. What is wrong with you? And so, and I know I'm not the first person to say this. And it's like, if we're struggling with those guys, college and pro guys, how are the high school kids going to move? I mean, I know we said it's something early, but like, isn't the injury rate going to spike up big time for the simple fact that we can't get our hands on them and see them? I mean,
yeah, Bob.
Well, so first of all,
I'm training the shit out of my son right now. He's going to destroy everybody. Just so everybody knows. Sorry, Bob. Go ahead.
That's okay. No, that was. I'm sure that was more important than what I was going to say anyway. Now that I can't remember what the hell I was going to say. Well, so first of all, I mean, you think about high school kids, right? So I think you're assuming that if they're not moving well, their risk of injury is increased. I don't necessarily agree with that. Not with younger kids. In fact, when I do the FMS test with older guys, like in the big leagues, I think at some point that dysfunction, the ability to get around, it's going to run out. I think doing the FMS with younger kids just helps me make them better. I don't think they're at any greater risk because of how poorly they are moving. Fixing their movement is going to make them jump higher and run faster. So I don't know about that level of kid, but I don't think they're going to revert to anything. Now, that being said, oftentimes you go on platform 1 and you correct a lift. By the time you get down to platform 4, the guy back there is terrible again, which is why I don't like sending home programs to incoming freshmen. In fact, I haven't done it in 20 years, because who knows what the hell that squat looks like that you told them to do. I just don't do it. It's a waste of time, I think. So I don't know about how poorly they will move. We do have the ability, though, Adrian, to collegiately to look at video of them, because it's in the event, kind of what you're leading to, the event of, health and welfare, making sure they're moving correctly. So we can do that, which we would do in person, right? That's the only thing allowed. Now, the sport coaches can't do it. But if something's happening, and, so right now our athletic trainers, we have 20 to 30 teletherapies going on, 20 or 30 athletes getting teletherapy 2 to 3 times a week right now. Our athletic training's all over. We have mental health happening on the other side. We're hopping on with strength conditioning once a week, checking on the program, discussing it. I mean, I think that's about the best you can do. But I don't really, at least with my group, I don't have the fear that they're going to show up, just running all over the place. So that's not my fear anyway.
Yeah, we'll get Rob to kind of wrap it up here. But Rob, this idea that it's extraordinary circumstances, and is it fair to be judging people during this time and assessing? And you just want to have one final comment on it, because I think it is. I think it's a great time to be evaluating people's, like you said, their compliance, their accountability, their attitude, their character. Why not, eh?
Yeah. I just want to just take a step back to what Adrian asked, what Bob was saying. I think when you have athletes with asymmetries, it's the asymmetry that may be what makes them the athlete they are. Okay. So for instance, if I'm a right-hand pitcher, I am reinforcing that asymmetry compared to my left side every time I pitch, right? So in training, maybe we work both sides, but in sport, it's probably our asymmetries that are making us successful and being reinforced as we play the sport. That's one. In my opinion, whether I'm right or wrong, I'm probably wrong, but I think it's going to be the sport coaches that don't make the appropriate adjustments due to this scenario and go out and run practice like they always did is what's going to result in the injuries. I'm not sure if poor running mechanics and those types of things, where I agree with Bob, are going to increase injuries. I think poor running mechanics and those other types of biomechanical deficiencies will affect performance. I'm not sure if it will initiate more injuries. I think.
Well, if the load is excessive, it probably would, though, wouldn't you say?
I'm sorry?
If the load is excessive.
Yeah, but who's applying the load? That's my point. My point is the adjustments weren't made for the environment that they're returning to. Yeah. So who's applying the load? Who's applying the volume? Those are the things, in my opinion, that are going to cause more injury than someone not being optimal in their biomechanics, because that will come back with good coaching over time, I assume. But, and I think that's what has to happen. I think everybody has to get together. You have a head strength coach for a reason. And we said this, I think, last week. You have to determine, this is how we get everybody in the room. This is what the trainers need. This is what the strength coach needs. These are the adjustments we have to make. And everybody's going to want their piece of the pie. I get it. But, okay, we can't run practice like we always did. Let's put all the minds in the room together. How are we adjusting practice? Because of the conditioning these people, our athletes, are going to have, or meaning lack of. So instead of having a 2-hour practice, we're going to go an hour and a half, and Bob Aleo is going to have an extra half hour than he usually does for conditioning and strengthening, wherever it may be. Then week 2, we'll go an hour 40. Bob may have an extra 20 minutes, and gradually decrease Bob's time and go back to a normalcy of practice when it's appropriate, when demonstrated by our athletes. That's probably not going to happen. Most sport coaches are going to coach their sport. And that's why I think the injuries are going to occur, because those adjustments, if not made, is going to have consequences. As
Should
far
there,
as
be, should there be a consequence to that coach, though, if that's what happens? Like, and we're looking at this under a
he
magnifying
will.
glass. Yeah.
He will, because what will happen is if his athletes are injured, he doesn't have his starters, he'll be losing games, and then the consequences of not having a successful season, if someone doesn't want to be empathetic to him based on the coronavirus, will be him losing his job.
Yeah.
Right? So it all, like Bob said, it all comes together. And so, you know, that's why I think, you know, I wrote down before, that's why all of us together all of us together are smarter than just one. But who's ultimately going to determine what goes on? And the person who's going to be most accountable, whether it's the head coach, the AD, or whatever, because they have to reinforce, you know, what they want done. And their decisions on how practice is going to be run, how conditioning is going to be run, you know, in regards to a time factor, the plays that are called, they're ultimately accountable in the wins and the losses. And people may say it's not all wins and losses, and I'd like it to be that way. Then if that's true, why do we keep score? So,
Yeah,
you know,
that's bullshit. Of course it's
right, exactly. You don't win.
Losses in money.
Right. You don't win, you lose your job. Now, was it 1 season, 2 seasons, 3 seasons of losing? I don't know. That's up to the owner, the AD, whoever it may be. But you know, your accountability is to win. So, and that's so we go back to accountability. So what has to happen? I think everybody sits in a room and you're there because of your expertise. So you should listen to people's expertise. And then you come out with this plan, and everybody needs to follow the plan. And what's included in the plan? Objectives. We have to meet these objectives. Well, how do you meet those objectives? You measure those objectives so you have the information to see if they were accomplished or not. And the people that don't meet their objectives, you have to evaluate. Is it because of lack of effort? Is it because of lack of equipment? Is it because of lack of support, finances, whatever? But support, equipment, everything else should have been established in making an achievable objective. So you put all this together, and then everybody is accountable for what they're responsible for. And if everybody achieves what they're responsible for, then you have a successful team, because the cumulative success of each department is going to lead to the success of the team. But someone's got to be in charge, and everybody's going to be accountable.
Awesome. Why don't we end there, everybody? That was good. I'll be honest with you. Every week I'm trying to say, what the hell are we going to talk about this weekend? But it always turns out to be very, very informative. And I credit that to the people and the experience and wisdom they have. So we're going to jump on again next week, and I'll make up some shitty topic name, and we'll just keep talking. So thank you for being on. And again, be safe. Have a good weekend. And if the weather's nice, get outside and just try to live life like you can, right? So anyways, thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend. And
thanks, Derek.
Thanks,
appreciate
Derek.
all of you.
Yep.
See y'all.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot, guys. Cheers.